Welcome back to the third episode of the What Moves Humans podcast, the podcast that aims to help you understand yourself a little bit better so that perhaps you might decide that there's things that you're doing in your life that you may want to change, or things that you've wanted to do that have been difficult to change, and maybe this will help you understand some of the things that can be going on that can kind of get in the way of us making these changes. Last week I spoke about instincts. If you haven't listened to that podcast, I would recommend for you to do so, as some of the stuff that I'm probably going to address today will make more sense if you're familiar with our instincts and a lot of the way in which they work. Today, what I want to talk about is how we form thoughts, and probably more of a focus on the thoughts that tend to hold us back. So first of all, what I think the thing to do is to recognize, and I'm sure most people kind of are aware of this, that we have two different types of thoughts. We have our conscious and our subconscious. The conscious thought, I'm sure, which you're very aware of, is the things when you think about doing something, or you make a decision where you've really weighed up stuff and you've decided whether you're going to zig or you're going to zag. Where you're seeing pure conscious thought is often with things that don't involve any kind of emotions, where you can be 100% objective with your thought decisions. The more subjective, different elements can start coming in that can influence massively the conscious decision-making process. And then you have, your pure subconscious thought process. There are decisions been made, but you're perhaps very unaware of that process going on. So this is more of your reactions. You just do something or say something or act in a particular way that potentially afterwards you can then question, why the hell did I do that? Most regret about decisions we've made tend to come from reactive decisions. And what I'm more going to focus on today will be these reactive type decisions. A lot to do with emotion and how we feel. They can tend to be the things that can feed into a lot of maybe happiness, unhappiness, or frustration, and happiness as well. Any sort of strong emotional response, anxiety, any of this stuff tend to come from that subconscious reactive side of the brain. Once we have that initial emotion or whatever it is, then our conscious thought process can tend to stem from those emotions. But before I go into that, I want to speak about ego, because it's probably something that I will refer back to over again, like the instincts, over the course of this podcast. For me, it's very clear in my head, and again, this is sort of something sometimes how you have to get out of your own perception in terms of communicating with people. Maybe some of you listening now will sort of think of the same thing. When I think ego, usually for many people it's we automatically start thinking about big egos and sort of overcompensating and stuff like this. But actually ego just is the Latin for it, means I am. And all ego really means is your sense of self. So what I mean by that is actually truly deeply how you really see yourself. Not how you want to be seen, not about other people's perceptions of you. Ego is very much about how you actually see yourself. Ego, emotion, and instincts tie in very closely together, because we spoke last week, when I spoke about instincts, it was more to do with the energy preservation and how that is one of the main tenets of the instinctual system, because it's it's all part of the bigger survival picture. The other thing is that it's also for your protection. So your fight or flight or freeze now responses or reactions to things that when we feel under threat. our instincts will also defend our ego, and that is our sense of self. This can be if we see ourselves in a good light or a bad light. I would argue that if you see yourself in a positive light, or your sense of self is in a positive light, and you like yourself, then you are less likely to be someone who has instinctual responses and tends to be less reactive, because you probably, if you really like yourself, you're probably not so subject to feeling your sense of self has been challenged. Anyway, I digress a little bit, and that will be a discussion for a later date. But this sense of self and the instincts is, if we feel at that level, in the subconscious level, that our sense of self is being attacked, we will also have an instinctual response. And that can be through our thought generation or emotion generation. This might be a revelation to some people, but to some of you maybe not. So how we feel, the emotions we feel, is totally internally generated. What do I mean by this? Nothing makes you feel anything. Something happens exterior to you, and then we decide what feeling we're going to assign to that. So this, particularly these days, where so much of the discourse is around emotion and shaming and outrage and around all these types of things, and I'll say it again, nothing makes you feel anything. Something happens, and then you make a decision about how you're going to feel about it. Now, the thing with this is it can mean that we're giving away a lot of our self-control, because we're handing away, we're saying that this thing external to us is making me act in a particular way or feel a particular way. And this stuff can lead to, as is the way, is it leads to a lot of unhappiness and stress and anxiety and all of these things. But for many people, they feel they're powerless because they haven't got this understanding that they're actually self-generating these feelings. And so, I guess like a thought experiment, or if you will, is you could have 10 people looking at the exact same scenario play out, and you could potentially have 10 different explanations of that scenario. Because all it is like how we're perceiving something. Now, when you understand that, and in these days of where we're supposed to acknowledge our feelings a lot, acknowledge our emotions, and I would actually say that that is a good thing, but often as I see it, is that we don't actually acknowledge our emotions or feelings. We tend to wallow in them. And we allow the feeling or emotion often to become the foundation from which our conscious thought then stems from, rather than acknowledging, which is, I'm feeling a particular way. Why am I feeling that way? And questioning it. The feeling will come because it's generated on that subconscious level. So that happens. And how that works is that your subconscious instinctual side will perceive something, and again, this ties back to this self-preservation. It will tie back to something that maybe has happened in the past, so it will go through the memories where it's maybe able to make an association, and this could be something about something that made you feel bad in the past. Then it perceives this new situation, and it will see a similarity and decide then, okay, well, this is similar to that last time, so I need to generate this feeling because this will save us. And even though it might be a totally different circumstance, it doesn't see the nuance, it just sees any similarity and then decides to generate the feeling to help you get through the situation, to protect you. So this can generate anxiety. What's anxiety? Anxiety is stress. What does it do? It gives you a physiological response and puts you in that fight or flight mode. The physiological response is that it increases heart rate, increases blood flow to the muscles, generates adrenaline, cortisol, all of those things. They are stress response hormones. Now those things are there for a reason, but the problem is today is that so much stuff seems to be making people anxious. And it can be, pressures from work, living up to what you think a successful life is, dealing with people, confrontation, whatever it is. Many people, the norm for them now is to feel stressed. It's such a normal thing. It's just part of our vernacular. I'm under a lot of pressure, I'm stressed. Those feelings that we have about these things generate a physiological response, which then can be detrimental to us. But the thing to understand is this is all self-generated. I know I've said it before, but I'm reinforcing it again. We generate the feeling because all we do is we translate what is going on exterior to us and we assign the feeling to it. But we're just unaware of this. And this is my point to, which I may have spoken about before in the previous podcast. Everything that we do is make decisions. We are just highly unaware of the majority of these decisions that are being made because they've been made at the subconscious level. So questioning these things, acknowledging them for sure. If we're feeling this, you're feeling a rise of emotion, particularly with negative stuff. When you feel this rise of the emotion, is questioning, where is this emotion coming from? Is this really the right feeling that I should be feeling? Should I be as anxious as I am about this situation? Is there any need for this, or does this feel like an irrational fear or anxious or stress or whatever it is? Now, the other thing that sort of can lead on from this, if we're not checking these initial emotion or initial feeling, when our conscious mind takes over, and it is just the conscious thought process is stemming just from the feeling because we're feeling this way, so now that is going to be the foundation for our thought process. Particularly with things in the future, is that we do something, or it's a very common thing, is that we tend to do something called catastrophizing. Now, how physics works, quantum physics, is that there are infinite possibilities in the future, and any sort of changes in the present now can lead to infinite possibilities and infinite outcomes. However, if we perceive some sort of danger at this instinctual subconscious level and we have generated an anxiety, and we then allow our conscious thought process to stem just from this feeling or emotion, often what we can tend to do is we allow that emotion to cloud the conscious thought process. We then immediately go to the worst case scenario and often exaggerate that worst case scenario. We then forego any other possibilities and then just focus on this one outcome and then that becomes the thing we fixate on. That is the thing that is definitely going to happen. Obviously, doing something like this is not particularly helpful to us because we can expect the worst to be happening all the time. And it's not even that we plan for it. All we do is focus on the potential problem rather than what are the potential solutions. So this is the basic rundown of how thoughts are generated. These ones which can be like the irrational fear or things like this, or very emotional stuff, particularly things with emotions. So like less so when they're things that are objective, things that we're thinking about, or objective decisions which tend to be totally conscious thought where there is an emotion involved. But these subjective thoughts, things that can affect us, to do with family or anything that can affect us personally, the closer it is to us, the more personal it is to us, the more emotion will go into this decision-making process. And if you're not aware of how this process goes and where these emotions and feelings come from, You can mistake that it is something external to you that is making you feel this different way, this particular way. So you have to act in a certain way to protect yourself. So the instinct is translating something external, generating a feeling or emotion for the purpose of self-preservation. What I would say is always a good thing to do is when we have these feelings is to really question it and start doing the thought analysis. Like the most simple thing, and I'm sure pretty much everyone will heard about it, like, and anyone talks about meditation, is like breathing. What does that actually do? When you feel like any kind of emotional rise, before you act, just take a moment, just to take a breath. Just doing that action where you focus on your breath, you feel it going in and out. What that does for you, both physiologically and psychologically, is twofold. So physiologically, the slow exhalation of breath triggers your vagus nerve, which tells your body that we're not in danger. So it allows your body to relax, it will bring the heart rate down, things like this. Taking those couple of seconds to take that breath in will allow you to start applying conscious thought. As soon as you can start bringing in conscious thought, you're more likely to have a response rather than a reaction. So a little usable tip there that you might want to try out during the week. So I hope you have enjoyed this little rundown on how thoughts are formed. Next week I am going to jump in a little bit more how this process, or not knowing this process, can affect us in terms of things such as, as I alluded to earlier, outrage. I want to dive in a little bit more about ego and sense of self, how that can affect us in terms of how we communicate with people. We all know people who we see can potentially self-sabotage. What are the processes that go behind all of that stuff? Again, this is all very much tied in with ego, instincts, all of this stuff. So I would highly recommend for you to go back and listen to the second podcast, and even maybe the first and the second. The first one's quite short, the second one's about 20 minutes long, so that you understand a little bit better how these thoughts are formed and how it all goes into this bigger picture. So thanks for listening. Chat to you soon. Bye. This podcast is sponsored by The Human Movement. The Human Movement facilitates your development of a framework for objective, optimal decision-making for your most subjective problems. Up to a 90-day course with assessment on intake, on 30 days, on 60, and then on 90 days. Developing a new way of how you make decisions. Skill building for the mind that can be applied to any problems that you have personally had overcoming or implementing changes. Once we have developed this framework and started applying the principles, then it is just about habitualizing this as the way you make decisions. For a free consultation to see if this could be of any help to you, please go to thehumanmovement.com. Become superior to your former self.